I never thought I'd be here, sitting by my window, watching the early morning sunlight filter through the trees, feeling such overwhelming peace in my heart. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when joy seemed like a distant memory, buried under the weight of my own doubts and fears. My name is Carly, and this is my story of how I learned to always begin the day with Jesus. I was living what many people would call the dream. A beautiful family, a career I was proud of, and a home that brought me comfort at the end of a long day. Life was good, really good. I felt like I was floating through my days, blessed beyond measure. I used to wake up every morning filled with gratitude for the daily blessings God had given me. But as we all know, life has a way of shifting, sometimes without warning. It started gradually, with small things. Moments where joy would slip through my fingers, and I'd catch myself feeling anxious for no apparent reason. Then one day, everything fell apart. My husband, my rock, lost his job. What was supposed to be a minor setback turned into months of uncertainty. The bills piled up, and the strain between us grew. We started fighting over the smallest things, and I could feel myself slipping into despair. I tried to keep my positive mindset, but it felt like the walls were closing in on me. One morning, after a particularly sleepless night, I found myself alone in the kitchen. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and overwhelmed by fear. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who lived with gratitude and joy. Where had she gone? I dropped to my knees right there on the kitchen floor, crying out to God. Help me. I don't know what to do. I can't carry this anymore. My voice was broken, filled with desperation. In that moment, something happened. It wasn't a thunderous voice from the heavens, and there wasn't an instant resolution to my problems, but there was a shift. A deep, calming peace settled over me. It was as if God was wrapping his arms around me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. I felt hope for the first time in what seemed like forever. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was powerful, a divine guidance that told me everything would be okay if I just kept my faith. I stood up, wiped my tears, and walked outside. The morning air felt cool on my skin, and the birds were singing, seemingly unaware of the chaos in my life. But I felt different. I felt a new sense of motivation and inspiration rise within me. I realized I hadn't been living with faith. I'd been so focused on what was going wrong, I forgot to see the beauty in the small, daily blessings around me. I had lost my spiritual growth, but in that quiet morning, I found it again. From that day forward, I made a promise to myself, I would begin every day with Jesus. I would focus on the good energy and inner strength he provided, instead of the things I couldn't control. Life wasn't instantly fixed, and there were still challenges ahead, but my mindset had changed. I started each day with prayer, finding peace in the quiet moments before the rest of the world woke up. I felt the joy return, not because my circumstances had changed, but because I had. My faith grew stronger each day. I began to realize that God's plan was bigger than I could see. He was teaching me patience, resilience, and most of all, trust. I reconnected with my church community, and I started reading the Bible daily. Verses like Philippians 4 verses 6-7, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus, became my anchor. Even in the moments when doubt crept back in, I reminded myself of the peace I had found in that quiet morning, and I would turn back to Jesus for comfort and strength. My life started to change, not in the way I had expected, but in ways I needed. I found joy in the little things again. My relationship with my husband healed, and we began to walk this journey together with a renewed sense of purpose. It's amazing how one moment of vulnerability can lead to such profound spiritual growth. Looking back now, I see how every step of that difficult time was leading me closer to Jesus. I've learned to forgive myself for the times I let fear take over, and I've learned to forgive others, too. There's a sense of serenity that comes with knowing you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders because God is carrying it for you. This is just the beginning of my journey, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that when you start your day with Jesus, everything else falls into place. No matter what life throws at you, you can face it with a calm heart, knowing that God is with you every step of the way. As the days passed, I clung to my newfound faith like a lifeline. Every morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose, starting my day with prayer and affirmations. I reminded myself of God's presence and His promises. I was trying so hard to keep my head above water, but deep down, I knew another storm was brewing. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension that I couldn't shake. I wanted to believe that things were getting better, but life had other plans. It was a cold Monday morning when I got the call. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, basking in the quiet of the house before the day truly began. My phone buzzed on the countertop. It was my husband. His voice, usually so steady and warm, was shaking. "Carly," he said, pausing like he was trying to find the right words, "I don't know how to tell you this, but we're being sued." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. My mind went blank for a moment, trying to make sense of what he had just said. "What do you mean? Who? Why?" My voice cracked, betraying the fear rising in my chest. "I don't know all the details yet," he replied, "but it's related to some paperwork from my old job. Something about a contract that was never fulfilled." I swear, Carly, I didn't know this was coming. Panic began to set in. We were already struggling financially after his job loss, barely making it through each month. Now, a lawsuit. It felt like a cruel joke, like the universe was throwing one more obstacle in our path just to see if we would finally break. My hands trembled as I set my coffee cup down, and I felt the familiar sting of tears welling up in my eyes. "Okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We'll figure this out. We have to." But as soon as I hung up, I felt the weight of it all crashing down on me. The fear, the uncertainty, it was too much. I had worked so hard to rebuild my faith, to find joy in the little things, and now it felt like everything was slipping away again. My mind spiraled, racing through every worst-case scenario. How would we pay for a lawyer? What if we lost the case? What would happen to our home, our family? In my desperation, I fell to my knees again. This time, though, the peace that had once washed over me was nowhere to be found. I prayed harder than I had ever prayed before, begging God for guidance, for a sign that He was still with me. "Please, Lord," I whispered through my tears, "I can't do this alone. I need You." But instead of comfort, all I felt was silence. It was as though the heavens had closed their doors, leaving me alone in my fear and doubt. I stayed there on the floor for what felt like hours, waiting for something, anything, to reassure me that everything would be okay. But no voice came, no divine intervention. Just silence. The days that followed were a blur. My husband tried to stay positive, but I could see the worry etched into his face. He spent hours on the phone with lawyers, trying to sort through the mess, while I struggled to keep our lives from unraveling completely. I felt like I was drowning again, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find the same sense of calm that had carried me through before. I started to question everything, my faith, my prayers, even God Himself. How could He let this happen? Had I not done everything right? I had prayed, I had trusted, I had given my life to him, and still, here we were, facing another impossible situation. It felt like a cruel test, one that I was failing miserably. One night, after a particularly grueling day, I sat in the living room, staring out the window at the dark sky. The house was quiet, too quiet. My mind was a whirlpool of fears and doubts, dragging me deeper into despair. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing everything. In the midst of that darkness, a thought crossed my mind, uninvited but persistent. What if God had abandoned me? It was a terrifying thought, one that I had never allowed myself to entertain before. But now, with everything crumbling around me, it seemed more possible than ever. Maybe this was my punishment, maybe I wasn't worthy of his help after all. I fought back against that thought, but it clung to me like a shadow, whispering in my ear when I was at my weakest. I tried to shake it off, to remind myself of the daily blessings I had once cherished. But it was getting harder and harder to find them amidst the chaos. As I sat there, battling my own mind, something inside me snapped. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the cold night. I needed to get out of the house, to clear my head, to find some semblance of peace. I wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets, my breath visible in the chilly air. The city lights glimmered around me, but I felt completely alone. I found myself walking toward the small church at the end of the street. I hadn't been there in weeks, too ashamed of my own doubts to face God. But now, in my desperation, I felt drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The church was empty, save for the faint glow of candlelight flickering near the altar. I sat in one of the pews, my hands clasped tightly together, and closed my eyes. God, I whispered, my voice shaking, I don't know if you're listening anymore. I don't even know if I'm worthy of your help. But I need you. Please. I need you. I sat there for what felt like hours, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But once again, there was only silence. The silence of the church was deafening. I sat there, staring at the altar, waiting for some divine sign, some flicker of light or whisper of reassurance to pull me out of this pit of despair. But nothing came. It was as though the walls of that sacred space were closing in on me, reflecting back the hollowness that had settled deep inside my soul. I tried to pray, but the words caught in my throat. Everything felt meaningless. Every whispered plea seemed to vanish into the void, as if my cries for help were too small, too insignificant to be heard by the Creator of the universe. For the first time in my life, I felt truly abandoned by God. My thoughts raced, filled with questions and doubts that I never dared to speak aloud. Was this the end of my faith? Was I wrong all along? Had I been foolish to believe that God would ever intervene in my life? The weight of those questions bore down on me, suffocating every shred of hope I had left. As I sat there, lost in the turmoil of my thoughts, the door to the church creaked open. I barely noticed at first, but the sound of footsteps echoed softly through the empty hall. I kept my eyes down, hoping whoever had entered would leave me in my misery. But the footsteps grew closer, until they stopped just beside me. "Carly," a soft voice said, one I recognized immediately. I looked up to see Sarah, one of the women from my Bible study group, standing beside the pew, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and kindness. "I thought I might find you here." I forced a weak smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "What are you doing here?" I was walking by and saw the light on. I had a feeling, she hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. I wasn't okay. I hadn't been okay for a long time, but hearing it out loud made the weight of it all crash down on me even harder. I opened my mouth to speak, but instead of words, a sob escaped my throat. I quickly covered my face with my hands, embarrassed by the raw emotion pouring out of me. Sarah didn't say anything. She just sat down beside me and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. It was such a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like the only solid thing in a world that was spinning out of control. I couldn't stop the tears now, couldn't hold back the flood of grief and fear and doubt that had been building inside me for so long. "I don't know what to do anymore," I finally whispered through the tears. "I've tried everything. I've prayed, I've trusted God, I've done everything I'm supposed to do, but nothing is working. It just keeps getting worse. And I'm so tired, Sarah. I don't know how much more I can take." She nodded, listening quietly, her hand still resting on my shoulder. "I understand," she said softly. "I've been there too. It feels like you're drowning, and no matter how hard you fight, the waves just keep pulling you under." Her words mirrored exactly how I felt, and it was both comforting and terrifying to know that someone else had been in this place of darkness too. "How did you get through it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a deep sadness that I hadn't noticed before. "It wasn't easy. I wish I could tell you that there's a magic prayer or a moment where everything just clicks and the pain goes away. But that's not how it works. For me, it was a long road. Some days, I was angry with God. Other days, I felt nothing at all. But I kept showing up. Even when it felt pointless, I kept praying. I kept talking to him, even when it felt like he wasn't listening." I swallowed hard, her words sinking into the cracks of my fragile faith. "Does it get better?" Sarah smiled gently, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "It does. But not in the way we expect. The thing is, Carly, God never promised us an easy life. He never promised that we wouldn't face trials. But He did promise that He would be with us through it all. Even when we can't feel Him, even when it feels like He's gone silent, He's still there." I wanted to believe her. I wanted so desperately to feel that comfort, that sense of divine presence again. But in that moment, it felt impossible. What if I've lost Him? I asked, my voice breaking. What if He's given up on me? Sarah shook her head firmly. "He hasn't. Carly, He never gives up on us. We give up on ourselves, but God. He's always there, even when we turn away. You haven't lost Him. You're just in the middle of the storm, and it's hard to see the light when the waves are crashing all around you. But trust me, it's there. You just have to hold on." Her words hung in the air, filling the space between us with a fragile hope. I wanted to hold on, but every part of me was so tired, so worn out from fighting. Still, I nodded, wiping away the last of my tears. "Thank you," I whispered, though the doubt still lingered in the corners of my mind. Sarah smiled, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You're not alone, Carly. And you're going to get through this. One day at a time, one prayer at a time." We sat there in silence for a while, side by side in the quiet church, as the flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls. The storm inside me hadn't passed, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel quite so alone. But deep down, I knew the worst was still ahead. The lawsuit, the financial strain, the weight of uncertainty, it was all still looming. and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on before everything came crashing down. As the days passed, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope between hope and despair. Each morning, I'd wake up and try to muster the strength to face the day, but it felt like I was dragging myself through an endless fog. The pressures were mounting, bills piling up, court dates looming, and the constant reminder that my life was unraveling. I prayed, but the silence was still there. No divine intervention, no sudden relief. Just the weight of everything pressing down on me, threatening to break me. But something strange began to happen. It wasn't a miracle in the way I had imagined, no parting of the seas or a voice from heaven. Instead, it was small, almost imperceptible at first. In the midst of all the chaos, there was a shift inside of me. One morning, as I sat with my coffee, staring at the rising sun, I felt it. Peace. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of something bigger than my fears. It was as if, for the first time, I could breathe again. I started each day differently after that. I'd whisper a quiet prayer, not asking for miracles, but for strength. Daily blessings, Lord. Just give me enough to get through today. I reminded myself to look for the small joys, the birds singing outside my window, the warmth of the sun on my face, the simple comfort of a kind word from a friend. It was as though God was teaching me to find Him not in grand gestures, but in the tiny moments of grace scattered throughout my day. The lawsuit was still ongoing, the bills were still there, but somehow, I began to feel lighter. The weight wasn't gone, but I was no longer carrying it alone. One afternoon, as I was walking down the street, I passed by a little bookstore. For no particular reason, I felt drawn inside. The smell of old books and the quiet hum of the place felt like a sanctuary from the world outside. I wandered the aisles aimlessly until a small book caught my eye, Finding Peace in the Storm. I picked it up, flipping through the pages, and there it was, a passage that seemed to be written just for me. When the waves of life are crashing around you, remember that even in the storm, God is with you. You are not alone, and you are never forgotten. The words hit me like a tidal wave. I stood there in that quiet bookstore, tears streaming down my face, and for the first time in months, I knew, truly knew, that I was going to be okay. The storm wasn't over, but I had found my anchor. God hadn't left me. He had been with me all along, quietly guiding me through the darkest days, teaching me to trust Him even when I couldn't see the way forward. As the months passed, things began to shift in ways I hadn't expected. The lawsuit was settled in my favor, a financial burden lifted that I had feared would crush me. The peace I had found grew stronger, not because my circumstances had magically improved, but because I had learned to rest in the presence of God's love. I prayed more, not out of desperation, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for the storm, for it had brought me closer to Him. One evening, after everything had finally settled, I found myself back at that little church. The same church where I had once felt so lost, so abandoned. But this time, I didn't come with a heavy heart or a desperate plea. I came to say thank you. I knelt at the altar, tears in my eyes once again, but this time, they were tears of joy. I whispered a prayer, not for myself, but for anyone who was still lost in their own storm. Lord, give them strength. Show them that you are with them, even when they can't feel you. As I stood to leave, I felt a warmth flood my heart. I looked up at the cross and smiled, knowing deep down that I would always begin my day with Jesus from now on. Every morning, every hardship, every moment of joy, He was with me. My faith, once shaken, had been restored, stronger than ever before. I had found peace in the storm, and with it, I had found my way back to God. And as I walked out of that church into the cool evening air, I knew that no matter what life threw at me next, I would be okay. Because I wasn't walking alone anymore. I never had been. Faith, hope, joy, they weren't just words. They were the pillars holding me up. And as I looked up at the sky, stars beginning to twinkle in the fading light, I whispered one final prayer. Thank you, Lord, for never letting me go. And with that, I went home, filled with a peace that I knew would never leave me. The storm had passed, and in its wake, I had found the true meaning of happiness, trusting in God's daily blessings, no matter what.
Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Shrine of Lightness, and turn on notifications to keep receiving inspiring stories of faith. Together, let's open our hearts to the divine and witness the restoration comes from trusting in God.